Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I thought I'd give you guys my thoughts on the state of the League of Kalandra League. So obviously things aren't going so hot with a lot of the stuff in the new league. A lot of the reworks didn't exactly land. We've got some issues with loot, crafting is much more difficult, and we've got stuff like the economy issues with divines and making player power a lot lower. There's definitely a few things which are going a little bit the wrong direction here. So obviously I like to keep things positive and constructive, and I'm going to continue to do so if possible, and hopefully we can see some improvements to the game moving forward. But the purpose of this video is to give my feedback on the thing that I know best, and that is the Lake of Kalandra league mechanic. So overall, the lake has been in a state in which it's kind of on hold. No one's running them anymore. They're all stashed up. Like no one's really feeling too motivated to run them because there's just not a whole lot of loot to be had if you do run them. So we've been patiently constructing our lakes, waiting for the buff, and that buff arrived today. So we got a bunch of changes, and it's looking to be promising. So I decided to jump into some lakes of Kalandra, and I decided to run some of the lakes which had been buffed, and I was running them at T16. So previously I had determined that in the early game, the lakes were a pretty good source of chaos recipe food. If you wanted to do chaos recipe, you could get some bubblegum currency here and there, and I was tentatively recommending them in white and maybe even yellow maps to kind of fuel that play style alongside essences. It was reasonably good. So what are the changes, and has it improved that? Well, the changes to Lake of Kalandra is that the generic elemental tiles have received a reasonably large buff. They now drop more loot, and it is noticeable. I would say it's probably about 70 to 80% more loot from generic loot tiles, and maybe you could maybe even say it's double. Which it's not bad. The generic loot tiles, especially the embellished ones like the silver and the bronze and the gold, those were the best tiles to get anyway, because they gave you guaranteed rewards. You were going to get something, which was definitely pretty good. Now, obviously, in the case of the non-embellished ones, you could get stuff like armor and jewelry and stuff like that, but the embellished ones always gave you something reasonable, or a chance to get something reasonable, which is what you want. So those have been buffed. Great, fantastic. Where does that leave the mechanic? Well, in order to assess this, we need to compare Lake of Kalandra to standard tier 16 mapping. So we already know it's pretty good in white and yellow maps for lower tier currency strategies. It only makes that better. So if you're already doing that and you were having an okay time before, it's only getting better. So that's pretty good. It's not going to tip over the mechanic into being busted or anything like that. We're not going to go back from reds to whites to farm the mechanic. It's not like Sentinel, but it is definitely worth doing as a stepping stone on your way to progression into red maps. So let's talk about it in red maps. Is it now worth doing in red maps? So I've run a few of my buffed lakes, and in general I would say from a fully well-constructed Lake of Kalandra, which doesn't have any outstanding or outlier kind of tiles. I'm talking about the Strongbox, I'm talking about the Breach Lord, and the Ghost one, the Torment Gold one. If it doesn't have any of those three, I would say that the rewards generally come out to be about, pending any crazy drops that you get, about 20 to 40 C per lake that you run, if you get average loot. So 20 to 40 C, is that worth your time running? Well, we really have to dig into exactly how long it's going to take you to run, and what your kind of character is doing in terms of its progression. So if you're in T16 maps and you're just running altered maps, running Eldritch Altars, and you're running maybe Blight or something like that, I would say that in my opinion, the Lake of Kalandra's, if you're not getting any outstanding tiles, are still not worth running, unfortunately, because when you compare the loot, it's just too similar. When you get rewards from your maps, you're probably making 20 to 40 C from Blighted map farming, from Legion farming, from anything else you're doing. You're probably making that much already, and it's in loot which you can more easily sell. So if you're doing Blight, you get Blighted maps and oils. Okay, you can sell them in bulk, and it's part of your strategy. If you're doing Lake of Kalandra, you're gonna get quality gems, you're gonna get stacked decks, you're gonna get bubble currency, alteration. It's not as consolidated in terms of loot, which makes it more difficult to deal with and more of a pain. Lake of Kalandra needs to be substantially more rewarding to compete with these strategies, otherwise people are just not going to do it. You know, getting 3 or 4 scarabs is great, but you know, we need to be able to manipulate that so we can get scarabs more consistently, so it can be part of a strategy. If I can't manipulate the mechanic in a way in which I can construct a strategy around it to be more competitive than the ones in maps, it's just not going to be worth running. So overall, that's the state of the rewards. Right now, the league mechanic rewards are also a complete write-off with the exceptions which I've talked about. Maybe Expedition is worth throwing in there, but you know, at the end of the day, you're really signing up to get 3 or 4 exotic coins or burial medallions, which isn't exactly thrilling when you can pop some incubators on from your legions and get the exact same reward times 10 for doing incubators, which is, you know, that's what it is. Overall, the rewards still need further buffs, but we're going in the right direction. I would say on a very, very low level of investment, maybe if you're doing T13s or 14s, and maybe it's worth doing it for you. You can pick up some stacked decks, which you could sell for like, you know, 1C each almost. You can pick up some bubble currency, but you know, if you're doing any sort of developed and well-rounded league mechanic strategy in the Atlas using Kirak or using Stream of Consciousness or anything like that, it's almost just more worth your time to put another map in at this stage, even after the buffs. So we're going to need to see even more substantial changes, otherwise it's just not going to be competitive moving forward. Okay, so that's the reward angle. So obviously they're getting close, we're moving forward, but I would say they probably need to double the rewards again. And they need to like do something crazy with the league mechanic rewards, or it's just never going to be worth it. Because doing Harbinger in the mechanic is just exactly the same as Harbinger in maps, unless you have an embellished tile, and even then it's not too crazy, because it's just the same thing, but way, way harder, unless you have the really extreme crazy tiles, but those are few and far between. You know, doing Legion in the Lake of Kalandra, using the standard Legion tile is just worse than doing Legion in my maps, because I'm spec'd into Legion. I am not getting any chance to get emblems, I'm not getting additional warhordes, I'm not getting anything unless I get an embellished tile, which literally makes it worse than just putting another map in. It's just not going to be what we want here. Okay, so we've harbored on enough with the rewards. We need to see what they're going to do with that. It seems that there's more changes coming specifically to the league mechanic tiles. I think if, you know, the current elemental tiles stay the way they are and they're like a consolation prize, that's fine. You can get a handful of scarabs, it's great. But the league mechanic tiles really need to hit at home. You need to be excited to get a league mechanic tile, not being like, oh man, where's my other elemental embellished tile? That needs to be a different situation there. So they need to buff that up incredibly hard. Incredibly hard. It needs so much of a buff, man. Okay. Moving on. Let's talk a little bit about the actual gameplay of the mechanic. So having run them quite a lot now, I think the best comparison is of the mechanic is to running a mineral pools map with a much longer layout, except all of the monsters are replaced with rogue exiles and bosses. In the endgame, that is kind of how the gameplay goes, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's almost like a boss rush encounter. It's like a gauntlet that you're running through, and there's bosses and you can slay them. If your character is good at killing map bosses, for example, or you know, rogue exiles in incredibly pokey and difficult situations, so that's because of the layout, this is actually probably going to feel pretty good. And I can see how it would feel pretty good on a maximum movement speed character with really good boss single target damage, where you just go in, bam, one shot boss, loot, bam, boss loot, and you could, like, you know, move through them really quick. But right now, I'm not playing a bossing character, I'm playing a mapping character. And, you know, it's not the most fun just doing rogue exiles and bosses when those are the most rewarding. You know, I understand that they need to make them more challenging, but all of the tiles that you're going to end up with in the end game are going to be embellished tiles, and they're all rogue exiles and they're all bosses. And the actual layout of the map is very difficult for characters who don't have movement speed and they rely on stuff like shield charge or whirling blades. It makes it quite difficult to do anything properly and move through it quickly, which is what you want, compared to maps where you can obviously move and choose and pick your own layout and all sorts of stuff like that, which is great. So, obviously the experience of the fun factor is definitely a little bit diminished by the fact that there's no hordes of monsters to slay and stuff like that. So yeah, that's overall a bit of an issue, but I mean, it's fine. Like, you do have control over what tiles you're placing, but the most rewarding tiles are unfortunately some of the least fun ones, at least from my perspective with the way I play, which, you know, I'm a little bit sad about. Okay, so moving on, let's talk a little bit about the backtracking and the deaths that you may encounter. So we've talked about how the fact that All of these are bosses and exiles, some of the most rippy monsters in Path of Exile, and you have to fight multiple of them at once in incredibly difficult arenas. Okay, so that's just a recipe for death, right? Absolutely it is. It's definitely going to get you some deaths. Now, unless you had the foresight and the portal scrolls to place portals down incrementally as you're playing, you are going to be faced with a 2 to 3 minute run back if you have a long lake. And lakes get pretty damn long. If you've got any of the endgame lakes on a 5x5 board and you've constructed them to get the most loot for yourself, well, it's going to be a really long trek back, man. So I think something needs to be done there, because runbacks are never fun and they're not very encouraging to kind of go back in. I'd much sooner rather and have just closed the Lake of Kalandra when I die and just given up the rewards and just gone in and put another map in. We need some sort of a save point system or something along those lines, so it's not as punishing to die and you have the motivation and you feel like you want to go back in for another try, because right now it just feels a little bit like, what's the point? Because you have to do such a long run back. You could have cleared a whole nother map in that time. So yeah, that definitely needs to see a bit of an improvement there, in my opinion, if we can maybe see something to do with that. Okay, so we've obviously gone over a lot here. Final point is going to be the difficulty. So the difficulty in T16 maps, when you get to a very, very long-ended chain, especially with stuff like Beyond or with stuff like Harbinger or Legion, is obscene. So it's very, very high. 100% delirium levels of high in terms of tankiness of monsters. I would say it's probably pretty close when you get up to the 16 difficulty thing there. At least it feels like that, at least for me. So what are we looking at here? Well, we need to see some compensation for that difficulty, in my opinion, because obviously it's not an easy encounter compared to maps. Again, it's going to be even more difficult in maps with similar rewards, so we need to see some increased compensation there. To round it all out, we need to see some quality of life changes to the elite mechanic. We need to see some increases to rewards across the board, and overall I think that would probably be what does it. It needs to be so significantly, overwhelmingly more rewarding than maps though to justify doing the map layouts, the risks, the difficulty, and then I think that we can see some strategies form around doing some Lake of Kalandra, and then hopefully we'll see some more fun factor and some more people getting rich off of the new league. So with all that said, I know this has been a bit of a negative video, but that is my thoughts on the mechanic, and that is my thoughts on what needs to change, and you know, my perspective. Obviously there's a lot of other stuff going on, but this is what I've been focusing on and what I'll continue to try and make work. Every day I'll do some Lake of Kalandra and I'll try and come up with some new ideas, but until the buffs, we'll have to see what goes on until then. Until then, cheers.